this afternoon and being respectful of everyone's time, we want to get started. I want to take just a brief minute to thank each of you for being here. I want to thank Representative Rogers and Representative Drenner for coming as well, taking time out of their schedule. I'm sure they have business they could be doing back home, but it's important that they're here and participating, and I appreciate them being here. As we saw last meeting, I think there are a lot of issues raised. We recognize that there's multiple issues that need to be resolved before autonomous vehicles or driverless cars, depending on the terminology that you like, are fully ready to be implemented on Georgia roads. But I think the thing that I took away, and I hope each of you did, is that this technology is coming, and that we need to be preparing today for what's going to be several challenges and opportunities in the not-so-distant future. So with that, we're going to get started today. Again, I just would appreciate everyone trying to focus. We've in the first meeting and through each of our individual research, I think we have a good understanding of the basics of autonomous vehicle technology, and we're really trying to focus in these meetings on how we're going to handle the liability aspect, how we're going to, and just the actual implementation and recommendations of how to achieve that implementation of this technology on Georgia roads. So I know we have two speakers signed up. We also have a sign-up sheet that's on the podium up front. If you would like to speak, we welcome your comments, and we will certainly entertain those after our presenters who have already spoken. Just also real quick, for anyone who may have to leave the meeting, our third meeting is going to be November the 12th, and it's going to be a joint meeting, or a meeting that's going to take place shortly after a event that the Technology Association of Georgia is having at the Georgia Tech Research Institute, and so that will be an on-site visit there. Georgia Tech has a lot of exciting things going on in the autonomous vehicle field, and so we're looking forward to that meeting. It's going to be in the afternoon, so I hope you all can make room in your calendar for that. So without further ado, Catherine Sheriff, Emory University School of Law.
Oh, yes.
I won't hold it against you since I'm a Georgia State grad. I get my bar results on Friday. So for those of y'all out there who pray, keep me in mind on Friday.
Well, the important thing is, are you a Bulldog fan?
I'm a Bulldog fan. Another chairman privilege here, Nick Chubb, Cedartown, Georgia, my hometown. Go Dogs. So
you're saying that you're a chubby chairman?
Absolutely. Known Nick his whole life, and excited to see the success of him and our Georgia Bulldogs. So glad to know you're a dog fan as well.
Thank you very much. Again, I'm Catherine Sheriff, and at the outset, I will apologize. I'll be very brief today. This is an abbreviated version of my presentation. I started studying the issue for my professional negligence seminar, so I'm absolutely looking just at liability. Thank you. I'm only looking at liability, and ultimately my professor would like me to publish in a law and technology journal up in Richmond. So I will be submitting my final paper or report, if you will, in December, which I believe will be prior to your 2015 report from the committee. So this is my presentation, Quantum Leaps in Technology, Autonomous Cars and Engineering Liability. All right, so as we know, the legal obligations of an automated vehicle's human operator are uncertain, and engineers and manufacturers face uncertainty about professional liability. Marchant and Lindor are scholars that you might want to look at, and that I will also summarize in my report. And they are basically outlining the general consensus and pros and cons and things that people are considering when looking at different liability models. And then, of course, I believe we covered Google. So another thing is basically what sort of liability the legislature puts into place and the potential for litigation, which obviously will affect insurance and you know, ultimately deployment. So, okay. We've already spoken about levels of system integration, or you have in your first meeting. And the basic idea is that it will be a gradual transition. We aren't going to go, obviously, from you know, normal driving cars to level 4 automation. But there are many reasons that it would improve the social welfare. I believe a colleague of mine brought this up last time, and my favorite is actually the land use. And how do I go back? Excuse me. I'm a law student. I'm terrible at PowerPoint, so I apologize. Here we go. Previous. Okay. So land use and eliminating the need for parking. I think that that would be a great selling point, particularly to environmental groups. And then, let's see. So we talked about the state of technology in your last meeting. Here we are. So my paper begins with a historical view. And I believe Representative Kelly actually pointed out that, you know, we've considered these things before, just in different context. In the automotive context, we started with, you know, the vehicle, and then we talked about airbags and seat belts, and currently quite a bit of automation is already legal and permitted, such as the backup driving safety. I believe there's also cruise control with vehicles that you can set for a while and maintain your pace on the road. And the big question is whether individuals' liability will decline. I understand during the first meeting you all considered heavily whether the cost would be put on the driver as opposed to the manufacturer, and of course the effect of that, which is, you know, hopefully not stopping manufacturer's ability to produce these vehicles due to overwhelming cost. And the liability of auto insurers also might decline. This is from the RAND Corporation, and they have a lot of really excellent things. So, and then my main focus is about software developers and manufacturers. In a typical tort scenario, well, in vehicles, they're viewed as products. And of course, we're shifting to a service model, but currently under products liability, one who has been in an accident is able to sue multiple people and go from a contributory negligence standpoint or join several, depending on your district. So here, the manufacturer and the software developer could potentially be liable, depending on where the issue occurs. So the vast majority of research that I've found recommend the gradual approach, during which I believe you all spoke about, drivers maintain liability and control of the vehicle up into the point of full automation, and then that's considered. And also, basically the product liability system will continue. Here's the restatement second of torts. And interesting hypos. And this part is sort of fun. So I've been doing all of mine is scholarly research. So I'm coming at this from an entirely theoretical standpoint. So these are some of the analogies that I've run across, and basically what law professors and people that are trying to solve this problem are doing are analogizing to other areas of law, whether that be previous automotive things like airbags, or entirely different, but they claim parallel areas of law. So one idea is about legislative preemption in the style of nuclear power. And so that would basically be some sort of, it could be strict liability for ultra-hazardous products. That would be one end. But Marchant and Lind, or what they're recommending, is a type of immunity or preemption for those types of things, because even though they are terribly dangerous, we consider them ultimately useful. The other that is pretty interesting is legislative protection vaccine style. I've also seen some arguments that basically autonomous cars are like vaccines in that they work best when everyone has one. So we need to really promote and facilitate the infiltration of these into the market. And so the argument there is basically for complete statutory regulation, exempting manufacturers, and that would be more like immunity. And then what I find probably the most fun is canine liability. And I think most of us know in Georgia we have leash laws. However, if your animal actually injures someone else, you are liable strictly. So there's also that. And there are many policy interventions. Again, federal preemption. There's also the irrebuttable presumption of driver control, which is basically what most scholars are promoting right now. I think that it's obviously the safest way to go. And then on the other end, there are some scholars.
Let me hop in here real quick. There for the irrebuttable presumption. When you're looking at that research, have you seen it allude to then where if the driver wanted to seek like a sort of indemnification from a manufacturer, is that what they're suggesting on that level of whether they would, if the driver, like you said, the irrebuttable presumption of the driver in control, but then the driver having the duty to show they weren't in control, that the manufacturer, and then put the responsibility on the manufacturer. Is that what they're alluding to there, or have you seen anything like that?
I have, yes, Representative Kelly, and basically it would be a sort of tort system in which you're smoking the other person out, sort of thing. So it is sort of an indemnification setup. But again, there's many policy considerations, because if you put the impetus on the driver to prove that the driver was not in control, or that it was some sort of malfunction, thus in the product's realm, then in manufacturer liability or software liability, that actually puts quite a bit of pressure on the driver himself as to cost of litigation, expert witnesses, and things that honestly might not be feasible.
And then so that's kind of one school of thought, and the kind of complete opposite would be having a strict liability as an inherently dangerous product, which may lead to the technology not developing as quickly
or at all.
And okay.
Yes. So those are the two schools of thought, and then even further looking at ideas include things about actually subsidizing those who are implementing these technologies, or
one more thing before you dive back in there too deep, Representative Rogers.
Yeah, just a quick question, Ms. Sheriff. But some states have already gone ahead and implemented legislation regarding this. How have they, or do you know how they have addressed the liability aspects? Has it been pretty standard across the board, or are they sort of like doing like we're doing, just sort of feeling it out as they go?
I think that actually it's been pretty standard across the board. Everyone has a gradual approach. Nevada is sort of interesting because they're looking more at the licensing system and actually have different color tags that they're proposing for a person who's operating, for lack of a better word, a standard vehicle, and then a different color tag for one who is operating an autonomous vehicle or some. So they're looking at that. So that's obviously a different approach in Nevada. As you know, California has backtracked a bit, and they are regulating heavily now, it seems. So I would say overall that it's, and I have actually many slides of that I will be able to send to you that were scrapped from this particular standpoint. But overall, they are going from, everyone is basically feeling things out because this is such an uncertain territory. But I think that's where a lot of the reliance on academics is coming in. But there are some differences which I would be happy to submit to you following the meeting.
Would it be a fair assumption to say that we'll probably never know until it hits the first court case?
I think that might be fair. I'm going to be proposing 5 different models, and actually what you're suggesting is sort of the second thing that we're going to describe at the outset, what this liability will look like, so we don't wait until, you know, the first court case, sort of in a more proactive approach. And then the analogy for that is actually medical technology and the expansive liability that's arisen out of that. So does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so to wrap up.
Real quick, Chairman Satzler.
Oh, excuse me.
Appreciate your talking today. I was you're really picking up perfectly where we left off in the last meeting, and have been monitoring this pretty closely. If you want to wrap up, I can maybe direct my questions when you're done, or whatever pleases the chair. I do think from the perspective of federal preemption, I think the states are normally pretty jealous about protecting their own tort liability prerogatives. I would tell you, I think, given the pace of things at the federal level, I think the federal preemption, if it does come, might tend to mirror a set of best practices coming from the states. I'd like your thoughts on that. But I will also tell you, and I know your presentation touched on it partially, but there was a lot of discussion in the last meeting around a strict liability standard, almost a product liability, and I'd like to find out more about the medical devices specifically. But my take from the last meeting was, if we create a structure where everyone that puts the vehicle on the road has to demonstrate some level of financial surety, that they can stand behind what their vehicle or vehicles do, and we have a strict liability standard where the owner, in essence, owns everything that it does or it fails to do, then you really have a blanket of legal protection that protects the public and that allows responsibility to be proportioned out appropriately and creates almost a financial overpressure against people from willy-nilly putting them on the road or putting them in places that perhaps are too complicated and too complex to try to manage. Would you support the concept of a strict liability standard as a structure? And I ask that because I've got some concerns about a regulatory approach. What's your thoughts about strict liability?
Well, my thoughts about strict liability I addressed quite a bit during my products liability seminar last semester, and I would say that I would reserve my judgment. Obviously, it looks like strict liability is the cleanest way to address everything. But ultimately, in my paper, I'm going to go through 5 models, strict liability being one of them. And I think during the last meeting, obviously all of the considerations and everything that everyone brought out, and even the professor from GSU, the law professor, I looked over her liability little things she touched on, and so we're just sort of scratching the surface. But as a law student, I would certainly not offer any sort of legal advice, but I think that strict liability makes sense. There are pros and cons for each, and ultimately, I believe it'll be one of the 5, and so there's the hands-off approach, extra liability, or more of a strict liability, like the medical technology that I'm speaking of, an added layer of statutory compliance, which is more preemption, complete statutory regulation, which I know you all are shying away from, and that's more like the vaccine model, and then finally strict liability for ultra-hazardous products. So I suppose I'm actually finding subcategories within your strict liability category, which makes it a little bit more difficult to answer.
Okay.
If there are no other questions, I will conclude. And again, I apologize for such an abbreviated presentation, and I believe that Leo has all of my information, so I would be happy to send you the longer version. We went through together and tried to not repeat things that you'd already heard. And then of course my paper will be finished hopefully in December. So I would be happy to submit that to all of you with the caveat that of course I'm not making an official recommendation as a legal person.
We appreciate that, and would certainly welcome seeing your paper. We'll be working on our report in December as well. I think, and we have one other question coming, but I think when we're looking at this, we're really just talking about who has the burden of proof. I mean, I think what the entire argument here is and who should have that to start. And for me, it seems like, kind of like you alluded to, that if you put that on the individual consumer to start, that the hurdle may be so high that it would be nearly impossible for them to ever get a manufacturer involved. Whereas a manufacturer with data coming from the computer in the car, from all the quote unquote black boxes that will essentially be in the cars when this type of technology is out really working on the road, it would be easy for them to say, well, the reason this car malfunctions would be because the individual didn't do a certain update or didn't have it serviced in a proper way, and then they would be able to shift that burden there, but having the presumption on them originally seems to make a lot of sense to me, but giving them a pretty if they should be able to show pretty easily where the individual could have done something to throw it off course. But we'll let Chairman Setzler ask us a question, and I'll see if I think of anything else.
On the ability of governments to regulate something that is an emerging technology. I mean, I asked the question, there is a sense in which if the government designates and denotes something and blesses something as, quote, certified, then to the chairman's point, there is a shifting of burden. Okay, well, the government is certified to a certain level and taken on some responsibility for that. How would you comment on the limitations of a regulatory approach, perhaps through study of other states or just inherently in the process? And I ask that question because I think as we've reasoned through this, is there not a difference between a regulatory approach where things are permitted and reviewed against standards which candidly don't exist versus a framework that says these certain things have to be in place so that an appropriate structure of liability, chain of liability can be followed? You've got to be insured. You've got to you have to be able to name the owner that's responsible for the vehicle and those kind of things, so that you're in essence ensuring that a strict liability structure can work meaningfully versus a regulatory approach where the government sets standards against which it evaluates technology. Could you comment on your recognition of the limitations of that regulatory approach?
To answer your question, I feel that the strict liability and regulatory approach do converge slightly, only in that in order to hold manufacturers strictly liable, we will be going based on standards probably designated by NHTSA, what is state of the...
I'm sorry, I was talking about owners, not the manufacturer, but the
Mm-hmm.
owner. So that we're not, it's not accruing back to General Motors. It's the, if you and your law partners here in a couple of years get together and have a fleet of vehicles you put out there that services Druid Hills, Clifton Road, and the Emory campus, you as the owner putting it out there would be responsible. Now, you would certainly have contracts with controls providers or with a vehicle provider that you could go up the line if the failure was really on them. But I guess the comparison I'm asking you to look at is the difference between a regulatory scheme promulgated by either the state or the federal level versus a personal ownership strict liability standard with the owner of the vehicle that puts it on the road owns what the vehicle does.
I understand your question now. Thank you. I believe that the personal liability scheme at the outset would make a lot more sense, given that just basic ideas of who has the most control to maintain the vehicle. The fact that the automation, frankly, will not be at level 4 until said date. So I think that makes much more sense. Plus, we're looking at our existing highway framework, so in our existing laws. So that approach would basically be like leaving everything as it is and seeing where the liability falls, whereas the regulatory approach, which is becoming somewhat cumbersome in California, is obviously very demanding of manufacturers, and ultimately it could result in higher prices, which will affect your owner as well. So insurance requirements, obviously, perhaps licensing requirements. Nevada's is pretty creative. I think that would be the way to go. So I would lean toward the personal obligation.
Thank you, Ms. Sheriff. We certainly have enjoyed your presentation. What class you got this afternoon?
Election law.
Election law. All right. Thank you for being here, and we look forward to seeing your paper when it's finished up.
Very good. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We're going to take just a few minutes to let Ms. Hayes from the Regional Commission get set up. So maybe we'll just take a little 5-minute break real quick. We'll get started back at, say, 1:40. because I know Miss Hayes has another appointment this afternoon as well, so I want to make sure she has plenty of time for her presentation and plenty of time for us to ask questions, as I'm sure it'll be engaging. Ms. Hayes, thank you for being here, and certainly look forward to hearing your comments and those from the Atlanta Regional Commission on this topic. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very honored to have the opportunity to speak before you today. As some of you know, I am very interested in this topic and have had some fortunate opportunities to meet some folks at the national level and learn a great deal. First, let me just introduce myself. I am a 25-year employee at the Atlanta Regional Commission. We are the regional planning agency for Metro Atlanta, and under the Center for Livable Communities, we take the responsibility of planning for transportation, research and analytics. We do all the population employment forecasts, as well as staff to the Metropolitan North Georgia Water Management District, and we do all the regional commission work required under the Georgia Growth Planning Act. I would like to say that you had an excellent presentation from Michael Hunter at Georgia Tech last time, who gave you a wealth of background information on autonomous vehicles. And I am going to be presenting to you today from a planner's perspective. So I'm going to assume that legal and liability issues, security issues are somehow figured out in those fields. But from a planner's perspective, and our job is to plan for the future, particularly transportation projects and strategies and investments. What's going to be most appropriate in this new world? So quickly, the Atlanta Regional Commission is the metropolitan planning organization. That's a federally designated responsibility for planning. Actually, our transportation planning area is much larger than the 10-county regional commission, and again, that's based on the census urbanized area. We are responsible for doing transportation planning looking out 25 years. We developed a plan in 2011 called Plan 2040 that's now being updated this year and will be updated again in 4 years. So looking out 25 years to 2040, what will the world look like? So I first heard about autonomous vehicles in 2012, and here it is 2 years later, and it's amazing how much has the whole mainstream, it's made it into the mainstream. There seems to be an article every day in some publication or newspaper. This is a quote from Bill Ford Jr. He made it at the ITS conference that was in Detroit earlier this year. We're on the cusp of a number of revolutions, not just to the car itself, but the way the car interacts with society around it. We really are at a position right now where the world is drastically changing. And how quickly can planners and government leaders, local and state government leaders, stay up with the technology? Therefore, it's so important that you all are doing this. I just want to point out a couple of things quickly in terms of, and you heard this earlier, between automation and connectivity. There are two major technological shifts that are happening today with regards to mobility and transportation. One is the automated self-driving vehicle. That's the Google, the typical Google car that you've heard about that can drive in traffic today, self-driving. The other is the connectivity. It's the vehicle-to-vehicle connection that talk to each other. It's also vehicle-to-infrastructure, where there will be perhaps sensors on the roads that notify the cars of things, hazards that may be about to occur. Eventually, over time, these technologies are going to be merging, and you can see from this graphic the advancement of each of these from connected to coordinated to cooperative driving. So of course the key question is when. How many years before most of the vehicles in the fleet are autonomous? And it just depends on who you talk to. No, of course no one knows for sure. This is from a traffic technology trade publication that interviewed a number of experts in the field, and you can see it ranges anywhere from 25 years all the way out to 100 years. So again, it's a moving target, and as you heard earlier today, I think it's for certain we can say that in the next 25 years we are going to be in an environment where there will be mixed traffic between the vehicles.
How recent was that publication?
This was in the September 2014.
Okay.
So just again, as you know, as planners planning for the Atlanta region, we have to think about what the impact will be from a number of perspectives. Obviously, crash avoidance is one area that has been spoken about, and if indeed we are able to avoid numbers of crashes, it could have significant impact to our congestion. Most of our I shouldn't say most, but a lot of our congestion is due to incidents. In addition to that, the capacity on the lanes could increase. In some cases, it could increase up to 80%. Because you have cars that are able to go at faster speeds closer together. Now, there's one caveat to this, though, is that when we get in a car, it's to go somewhere. We have an origin and a destination, so you have more cars on the road because they can go faster on the freeway lanes. What happens when they get off on the surface streets? So, again, it's sort of a double-edged sword. We have to look at capacity and issues at the origin and the destination as well. But again, bottom line is we do know that capacities can increase, and that could change many of the algorithms that we use in transportation planning. There's also economic competitiveness and quality of life. Technologies will impact the transit industry as well. Many folks are talking about the ability for transit vehicles to be autonomous, particularly if you have a bus route going up and down the same route over and over. And also the first mile, last mile of a trip might be also an opportunity for autonomous vehicles, particularly the slower vehicles.
Ms. Hayes, how do you, I know we just talked some about the capacity and being able to improve the capacity on the road. How much of that do you think will be needed because people are willing to ride in their cars longer now because they're able to be productive and they're not as concerned about how long their commute is? I mean, are y'all considering that? Whereas if now someone, from Columbus is willing to come work in Atlanta every day because they can sleep, for part of their ride up in the morning. And are y'all seeing that? That
is one of the areas that we are going to look into. In just a moment, I'll talk to you about some of the work that we're going to do as part of this long-range plan and how we can make some assumptions and what the impact might be based on those assumptions. No one knows for sure. We can do surveys, and in fact, we are going to be doing a survey later on this year and ask people their opinions about this. I know both personally, anecdotally, I would say, and as a professional planner, I still think that there is a limit to the amount of time people want to be in a car, even if they are able to sleep or do other work. But again, we really won't know the impact in the aggregate until we're there, but we can certainly make some assumptions with our transportation models to see what the impact might be. So, as I said before, we are on a path to completing a new long-range plan for the region by January of 2016. Starting now through end of first quarter, we will what we're calling futures planning, that I'll talk to you a little bit about, looking at potential futures and the impact that might be. But ultimately, the plan that we develop will be the blueprint for using federal and state and local funds in the future for transportation activities. So we want to take advantage and understand what this new technology might have, but we also understand that it is a moving target and many things we don't know just yet. So these are the three futures we're going to be testing: autonomous vehicles, transit-connected job centers, and other technological advances. As I mentioned, the connected cars, the vehicle-to-vehicle technology, as well as technology associated with freight delivery and the impact that that might have on the region. So in terms of what we want to try to answer, I think this slide hits that, and determining the congestion benefits. Will there be more congestion or will there be less congestion? What impact will that ultimately have for the a future in which we're forecasting almost 8 million people in the Atlanta area? As I said, we are going to be conducting a regional survey to look at public's perceptions and kind of to understand the degree that citizens may understand the benefits or what the barriers are. And we will have results at first quarter 2015 that we hope to include in our final planning work. And I'd like to say that ultimately, again, I keep stressing we don't know what the future is, but maybe there are some improvements that can enhance and make this a more positive outcome for the region. Maybe, and again, I'm just speculating at this point, it's maintaining our roads becomes more important because of all the technology that is needed in the cars to know what the roads, the condition of the roads. There's a multitude of things like that we can look at to see what's going to be most important for the future. Again, there's other technological breakthroughs. I mean, obviously, many things are happening at the same time that are going to impact transportation, from video conferencing that we already have today, but how more broadly that will be. Will people even be going to offices every day in the future? Those types of questions we want to look at. Barriers to working remotely, and again, other technology for freight delivery is going to impact our future. So there are a number of public policy questions. How do we balance investments in system maintenance versus system expansion? Are certain system expansion that are in our plan now, will they be needed in the future with this type of technology? And again, how will land use change? Does there need to be more drop-off and pickups because is it your personal autonomous vehicle, or are you sharing it? There's models of, is it going to be like a taxi or is it going to be like a chauffeur? The impacts to the economy from safety, from research and development, with particularly Georgia, could benefit very much from all the brain power we already have here in that regard. And how will our lifestyles change? And again, what level of regulatory reform is needed? I know that was mentioned earlier. And I'd like to mention, too, as you well know, the federal government reauthorizes a transportation bill usually every 5 to 7 years. They haven't been able to reauthorize one for a number of years. It's due to expire again May 31st. But are there some things at the federal level, policy incentives for planning agencies like mine to consider, and state DOTs, to make this a more positive outcome for our future? And that is short, but I wanted just to raise those questions for you in your deliberations. And again, I commend you so much for organizing this committee and hosting, and I think you've learned a great deal, and I'm excited to be a part of it. Thank you.
We certainly appreciate you being here. It was definitely informative, and we have a few questions. I just want to remind everyone who may have came in during one of the presentations, we will have a period for open comments following Ms. Hayes' presentation. So if you want to comment, we have a sign-up sheet for that. Just a reminder. But I'm going to go to Representative Drenner.
Thank you, Ms. Hayes. I'm curious. I see that you're going to do a regional survey. And what if the results hypothetically are not favorable to autonomous vehicles? Is there going to be a next step, perhaps an educational process that ARC will consider? And if not, how will that impact the regional plan that you're talking about that will be due in 2016?
Sure, that's a great question, and again, we really don't know yet what the impact might be or what the response might be, but I think we definitely would need to then follow up and try to understand what we're hearing. We need to then try to figure out the source of that. I can't say that the plan itself will be impacted by public comment. It always is. But at some point, we have to understand technology is advancing and where the public is here versus other places with regards to that technology. I think a lot of the response we get, we're going to just have to consider and think about it long term and consider doing these surveys year after year to see how perceptions may change. We're committed to trying to understand from the public as well as educate, but as you know, there's so many different factors to this that could impact the future of how it rolls out.
Representative Rogers.
Thank you very much. It was a great presentation. This is really, I don't guess, relate to your presentation so much, but it's a question that came up during the last meeting that we had, which I found to be fairly interesting. That the comment was made that, as I was just discussing with this gentleman, the comment was made that if everything works out like they think it is, and you get to the point of where it's a class 4 vehicle situation or whatever, then probably the most productive part of your day is when you're sitting there writing in and work, and you can email and you can do this and you can do that and everything else. And it may get to the point of where we're all talking about this easing congestion, that people are like, well, you know, rather than stay at home, I can just go ahead and ride in, and it may add to the congestion woes. Just wonder if you had any thoughts on that.
I do. I had the fortunate opportunity to participate in a workshop in July that looked at 7 different autonomous vehicle scenarios, from basically it solves all the world's problems to it creates all the world's problems. I mean, it was the bookend of 7 different scenarios of how autonomous vehicles could be in the future. And you're exactly right. How we can lay out these possibilities, but how does public policy and human behavior ultimately impact it? And again, it may depend on how the automobile as we know it may not even be designed the same way. There are people, I mean, who could read, as passengers could read in a car now, but they get motion sickness. I mean, it's not as if, you know, everything would be available to you within the structure of way a car is designed now, but there could be different designs in the future. The new Google Pod car doesn't even come with a steering wheel, but it only goes 25 miles an hour too. So again, I think we're going to be we're at the precipice of redesign of mobility all the way from all types of vehicles in the future. So it is possible that yes, very well, congestion could get worse, and I've heard experts say that could happen in the near future with the rollout, but over time it's going to change because there's only so much people can tolerate.
Chairman Setzler.
Hey, Mr. Chairman. Could you provide a little context for increased road capacity? You talked about if cars are able to driverless vehicles at level 3 or 4 are able to pull in together and use the road space more effectively. What does it mean to say that you've got 80% more road capacity?
Basically, you have more cars. We look at it in 1 mile segments on the freeway, 1 lane mile, and you have more cars passing through that 1 lane mile than you can today because of the spacing and the speeds. So the more cars you can fit together and the faster they can go, the more cars, more throughput you can get and I'm talking about a freeway
Sure,
lane.
sure.
And if you look at multiple lanes, there's so ultimately you get more cars, but at some point, where are those cars going? And do you have the capacity at the end of the trip to take all those cars that are on the freeway? So we have to look at it in its totality, systematically, those entire trips from start to finish. It's not just looking at freeway segments. But to answer your question, it's about the throughput.
So if we were able to throughput, I'm just making up a hypothetical number, 50 cars per lane on an interstate per minute or whatever, 80%. You're saying an 80% increase would mean you could now perhaps throughput 90 cars. Just following the math there. Okay. And I ask that because I think there's broad commitment across the state to provide more resources for transportation and make sure we use them smartly. This has the potential to be the first good news we've had in a while with respect to taking resources and using them well. I think there's going to continue to be a commitment to more resources, but I think in terms of where this falls in the balance of things, technology, using what we have more smartly has always been part of the conversation, but no one ever really knew what that meant. And this seems to be fall in that category, whether it's dynamic speed limits that change, whether it's road management where you can have reversible lanes. Those are all smart uses of the same infrastructure.
Right.
When does this become actionable for an MPO? Looking at a 2040 plan, 25 years out from now, is based on the ideas of experts, when does it become actionable and start to work into our algorithms about the relative value of lane miles versus, maintenance versus transit? I mean, when does that start to become actionable for an MPO?
Excellent question. And as a community, the major metro areas all over the United States we're all grappling with this together. And trying to figure out, in fact, the National MPO annual meeting is here in Atlanta starting tomorrow, and this is actually a session at tomorrow's conference. I don't have an easy answer for you, but I do know that we at the Atlanta Regional Commission are one of just a handful of MPOs that are actually saying we need to try to model this through our existing computer models, making some assumptions about what that additional capacity might be, whether it is or not, but just making assumptions, running through our models, because we have to start acknowledging that the future may not be like it is today. And we can't keep planning the same way if technology is going to change the future. So I would say, since we have to update our plans every 4 years, this is our first attempt and our first try at trying to take some of these things into account. In 2 or 3 more years, there could be a lot more, as this becomes into focus, we might be able to put even more and better assumptions into our models to see what the impact will be. But it's important because many projects take 10 or 20 years to build from concept to completion, and of course we want to be using that money as wisely as possible. So it's something we have to stay on top of.
Just one more question, Mr. What kind of candidate would you say Atlanta is relative to other areas? I mean, I've been quoted before as kind of reading numbers that talks about the lack of density in the metro area relative to many metro areas of its size around the country and the world. Many metro areas are much denser in terms of where people are. Atlanta, you're moving people from lots of different places across the metro, distributed job centers and so forth. As 5 million person, 4.5 million person metro areas go, would you say Atlanta is near the top of the list in terms of being able to benefit? If this technology were brought online, would we not be one of the top candidates in being able to benefit from what this could deliver from a point-to-point transit perspective?
I certainly would contend it is for a number of reasons. One, we already are building a system of managed lanes right now, and if the autonomous car were to be, our self-driving car were to be a freeway driving car, we already have a system in place of managing our lanes, perhaps. So, I mean, that's one. Number two, we have a wealth of different type of communities to try autonomous cars. Some are saying that the autonomous car might better be suited for more self-contained areas such as college campuses, military bases, retirement communities, where you have a slow-moving 25-mile-an-hour car going round and round. We have some of those in the region as well that could be candidates for that type of self-driving vehicle. We have a little bit of everything to test it out, and I think that plus we have incredible brain power in this region that would help as well. So,
one last question, Mr. If we could increase our road capacity today by 80%, you know, we've got a road infrastructure we've built. We're kind of living with what we have until we can bring more online, which takes time. If we can increase the road capacity of our interstates and our major arterials today, I know the technology doesn't exist today, but from an economic development perspective, you know, you think in terms of catchment areas. You know this better than I do, certainly. But you know, for any location in the region, you know, 45 minutes away where people can drive in, if you can expand the size of the circle, if today 45 minutes is a 15-mile commute, if you can expand that to 25 miles, you're then able to you have a more dynamic workforce. They can move from place to place.
right.
You can sell to people more because they can access things from a consumer perspective. I know you don't have a computer to model this in your head necessarily, but from an economic development perspective, how could you begin to quantify increased road capacity that could come with this technology in terms of economic development for the region?
It can be done, and I will take your question and back to ARC as we do our modeling to see if there's something that we can look at. But you're absolutely right in that the broader the catchment area, the more ability for companies to attract a wide variety of employees. So it is important to relieve congestion in this region, particularly during peak periods, and so it's something that we can go back and take a look at, for sure.
Representative Drenner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a hypothetical, you know, when the T-SPLOS failed and we heard a lot of discussion in my county about light rail, and then you hear this conversation continually about going to Macon or going to Athens. I'm wondering, when are you going to interject this conversation in the broader discourse of here's another possibility in which we can solve some of the transit problems that are plaguing our region?
Thank you for that question, and now is the time that this does have to be interjected into that equation. And I would also say that from a planner perspective, I would like to not make it an either or, that this technology is going to be part of transit in the future. This technology is going to be part of freight delivery in the future. This technology is going to be part of commuter rail in the future. So how will those types of mobility change based on this technology? And we have to consider it in all forms of transportation, not just the single occupant vehicle who may have a car that can drive itself, but all forms of movement will have access to this technology at some point in the future, and that's going to change our whole world.
Earlier when you mentioned the 80% extra capacity, did that take into account the accidents that would be avoided because the autonomous vehicle technology would, you know, surely reduce the number of accidents on the road. Did the 80% take into account that?
It did not. So you can see that it may actually even be higher, given the fact that 50% or more of our congestion is due to accidents. So, yes.
Representative Trender, did you? Anyone else? I'm good. All right. Well, we certainly appreciate you being here. It was a great presentation. We enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We haven't had anyone else sign up outside of our scheduled presenters today. So what I'll do now is, if members of the committee have any thoughts they'd like to weigh in here at the end, we can just go down the row, and we'll start with Representative Drenner. If you have any comments you'd like to make, Representative Rogers.
Yeah. First of all, there we go. First of all, I think I'd like to thank the presenters today. It was very informative. Looking at the legal aspects of it, also looking at the congestion and how the whole thing fits in. One of the things that I would like to see, because quite frankly, it scared me to death ever since our last meeting, is the security aspects of this whole thing. And I think that's something that's going to play into this. It has to play into it. We all know what type of cyber world we live in, and when I'm hearing that the technology that's being looked at is the same as for planes, which dates back to the 1980s. Quite frankly, I made the comment a minute ago that I'm not worried about Ebola on a plane now. I'm more worried about somebody hacking into the autopilot. But I think overall, these first two meetings have been very good. Chairman Kelly, I appreciate you putting it together, and it's been a real eye-opener for me, and I'm looking forward to the last meeting.
Well, I again want to just thank everyone for being here, and the committee members for taking the time to be here today. I want to thank Leo Chansey, who serves as a committee aide for this committee. He always does a great job of putting everything together for us and making sure we have all the information we need in coordinating the presenters. So, Leo, thank you. If you have information that you want to get to us, and even if you don't want to do a formal presentation to the committee, we would always welcome any kind of research or articles that you may come across or publish yourself. Leo, I'm sure, would be glad to give you his contact information at the end of the meeting, and he knows how to get all that to us. Again, I invite all of you to be at the Georgia Tech Research Institute the afternoon of November the 12th. Just before our meeting, there will be a legislative panel where we'll be discussing autonomous vehicle technology along with some other technological advancements that are coming down the pike. So I think, again, this has been an exciting meeting. This is something that we can take away, that this is something that's coming, and it's something we need to be prepared for. And that's as big of a responsibility as this committee has as anything else. So just want to wrap up with that, but we're going to give Chairman Setzler opportunity here for the last word. So thank y'all.
Mr. Chairman, I just something that occurred to me as you were wrapping up, and I just was going to share. I think this is something that Georgia has the potential to lead in, and appreciate your stepping out on this. We like to beat ourselves up. I had an wise old mentor tell me once, 90% of what people know about you is what you tell them. And sometimes we tell the world that Georgia is a bunch of negative things. And, last time I checked the population inflows and outflows of states, people are coming here in droves. I've got more Ohio State fans in my street than I've got Georgia and Tennessee fans. And that says a lot. And so I think I think we've got the potential to lead the world in this. And I think that's not, I don't think it's overstating it. So appreciate your leadership on this.
Well, I appreciate that, Chairman Setzler. And I think, as you mentioned that, I think something popped into my mind is that we certainly have some education to do with your neighbors.
Yeah, I was going to say, legislation opinion about Ohio State fans.
Thank you again for being here. We look forward to seeing you at our next meeting.